Can everybody hear us okay? Yeah, great, fantastic. So hey everybody, so we're going to talk for the next 25 minutes about millennial healthcare professionals and start to dissect some of their nuances when it comes to mindsets, attitudes, and in particular a channel mix, and why we as an industry need to radically change the way that we engage with millennial healthcare professionals to stay relevant. Quick introduction, I'm Knapp, I'm the CEO of Havas Lynx.
Great to meet you all. Phil Strite, Head of Product Strategy, representing our proprietary data division, Point One. So to ground today's presentation, just really wanted to focus on an emerging trend. I think we've heard a lot about data as well as artificial intelligence today. Similar theme here. So we've seen in the last 5 years a massive increase in the prominence of the need for data to inform those day-to-day decision makings. And that's firstly being driven by customers that now expect us to understand their unique nuances and preferences, but importantly being driven down by a mandate from senior leadership to ensure that the activities that we undertake are going to deliver that return on investment. Now, despite this ambition to increase access and usability of data, this slide here is quite a tongue-in-cheek assessment of the state of the nation where, yes, we quite often understand brand prescription, but we don't necessarily understand some of the important things that make three fundamentally very different customers, what makes them tick, what are the preferred communication channels and styles. So despite the ambition, we're not necessarily seeing that come through. This is exactly why at Havas Lynx we've created Point One. So Point One is here to bring the voice of the customer. To date, we have collected data from over 3,500 healthcare professionals globally. That means we've amassed over 12 million data points, but importantly, that helps drive for ourselves as well as our clients a range of strategic outputs from upstream audience segmentation and targeting all the way down to impact and effectiveness measurement. But what it also means is that we have a huge wealth of data to look at. So we're going to talk to you a little bit about millennials specifically. Everything that we talk to you about today is taken from a sample in excess of 1,000 millennial healthcare professionals. Everything you'll see is statistically significant, and it is, again, talking to the previous presentation about confidence. We have a high degree of confidence in the outcomes that we're going to talk you through today. But importantly, why have we focused on millennials? So I think across the majority of the specialisms that we work within, the millennial cohort of doctors is now the most sizable audience that we have out there at the moment. In most areas, it's over 50% of the doctors that we'll be communicating to. Secondly, in terms of the overall portfolio and brand lifetime value of these customers, they on average see about 230 patients every single month. So if we project that out, we estimate that the millennial healthcare professional is going to see over 100,000 patients and making decisions about your brands across their lifetime. So hugely important. And then the final piece is this is, as we'll talk a little bit about today, this is a hugely influential section of healthcare professionals. They far over-index in terms of behaviours that we would assign to kind of being somebody that is of particularly high influence. Three themes and trends that have emerged, and again, statistically robust data that we have to back these is, firstly, we heard this morning about generative AI as a platform that's going to allow us to generate thousands of pieces of content for healthcare professionals. Claire's going to talk to you a little bit about why that's not necessarily the most prudent thing to do. Millennials are the most burnt out generation of doctors that we have ever seen. And again, there's some nuances that need to be communicated across there. Next, we'll look at a really interesting generational divide when it comes to trust in institutions. We see much lower levels of trust when it comes to millennial healthcare professionals versus their generational counterparts. And again, it's pointing towards a new model of engagement with this group of customers. And then finally, this is the AI stage. We are, of course, going to be talking about AI. Yes, we see some interesting data in terms of the levels of receptivity towards it, but we'll be mainly focusing on how that's significantly different within the millennial cohort of doctors.
Perfect. So the first theme that we really want to explore is this idea of burnout within millennial healthcare professionals. So we are currently witnessing the fastest deterioration in healthcare professional well-being in recorded history. And that is particularly true for millennial healthcare professionals, which, like Phil said, are the most burnt out generation of doctors we've ever seen. And so we're going to talk a little bit about why that means we need to be more empathetic, more deliberate and more thoughtful and more creative in how we engage with millennial healthcare professionals. Just to kind of set the stage of this contextually, I think it's really important that we understand the scale of what we're talking about. So millennial healthcare professionals, up to 40% of them have been diagnosed as clinically depressed. They have significantly higher levels of anxiety, and heartbreakingly, they're 4 to 6 times more likely to take their lives than the general public. So this is a tragic trend that we're seeing. We're also seeing that millennial healthcare professionals are on average 40% more distressed than their generational counterparts. And all of this culminates in almost a third of millennial healthcare professionals feeling moderate to extreme levels of fear at work on a daily basis. So this is a massive, massive trend. And of course, there's many, many factors behind this, but one of the biggest drivers is cognitive burnout. And that's perhaps unsurprising when we think about the volume of data and content that we're asking millennial healthcare professionals to digest. If we go back to the 1970s, 1980s, and you took all of the medical volume of knowledge in the world and you doubled it, it would take 50 years. It's now estimated that we're doubling the amount of medical knowledge in this world every 73 days. And yet we're still engaging and we're still talking to doctors in a very similar fashion as we were in the 70s and in the 80s. So this is adding a huge amount of cognitive burnout to our millennial healthcare professionals. As I say though, that is just one driver. We're seeing this as a hugely multifaceted challenge, and we tend to cluster the challenges into the physical well-being, social well-being, and emotional well-being. So for example, obviously with millennial healthcare professionals, they're dealing with much higher volumes of patients compared to previous generations, and they're also dealing with much more complex ways of treating patients, combinations of different drugs, different protocols, etc. We also see what was quite interesting when we did a regression analysis on this data is that one of the biggest drivers of burnout in millennial healthcare professionals is actually negative media attention. Now, if you go and you look at the news and you look at your newspapers and on the line, a lot of the news around healthcare right now is talking about long patient waiting times. And now what's interesting is that the media is generally pinning that on healthcare professionals rather than the system that they're working within. And so that's having quite a big impact on how they perceive themselves and the recognition that they have. We also see significantly higher levels of individual litigation. So in the UK alone, there's been a 133% increase in litigation against individual doctors over the last 5 years. So all of this is creating a world where millennial healthcare professionals are cognitively burnt out, they're dealing with more and more complex issues, but they're feeling less and less rewarded and less recognized for the work that they're doing. And this is particularly pertinent for us because burnout impacts the prefrontal cortex, which interestingly was touched on in the Lego presentation earlier. But this has a real impact when it comes to being able to process new information, being able to learn and memorize new information, and importantly, when it comes to decision making. So burnt out millennial healthcare professionals are more likely to default to status quo decision making. And that is massively relevant to all of us because pretty much everything we create is trying to change an attitude or change a behavior. And when we're facing burnt out millennial healthcare professionals, that is a really, really difficult challenge to take. And so we wanted to share an example with a piece that we did with AstraZeneca last year in oncology about how we can use creativity and how we can be more empathetic and thoughtful in our communication to still engage what is the most burnt out generation of doctors. And for me, this is really relevant, especially when we talk about AI, maybe controversial to say, but generative AI is creating a sea of sameness when it comes to creativity. So for me, this is a real push as to why we need to be more thoughtful and more human in the creativity that we create. So I'll show the video and then we'll go on to the second theme. She says confidently.
Biomarker testing is revolutionizing personalized and targeted cancer treatment. But with 175 articles published every day, oncologists face information overload. As a result, 52% don't use biomarker testing. To guide them through this ever-evolving landscape, we gave them a map. Introducing Mapping the Tumor. Biomarker testing helps us navigate a tumor, like how a map tells us how to navigate terrain. Designed by cross-disciplinary experts, unique tumour profiles are explained through the characteristics of natural landscapes. We distilled hours of learning into an educational ecosystem.
We created 3 very distinct tumour maps. Each one likened genetic features such as BRCA mutations to natural features such as fault lines, or used river deltas as hormone receptors, showing how not only can they influence the landscape, but also therefore influence the disease.
By using these simplified metaphors, we were able to raise physicians' appreciation for comprehensive testing and biomarker-driven treatment. Our microsite became a central hub on OncLive, the largest oncology news and educational platform. We brought clarity to our audience, making navigating biomarker testing simpler than ever.
It's a really gorgeous example of how we can use creativity, creative metaphors to still engage with burnt-out millennial healthcare professionals.
On to the second key trend that we see within the data, and I think it's fair to say it's widely publicised that millennials as well as Gen Z, from a consumer standpoint, they are significantly less trusting in traditional organisations. And we're seeing the same trend within pharma as well. So we know also that today, after product features, corporate reputation is the #1 driver of prescription. But in that landscape, what we're actually seeing is about a 20% lower level of trust amongst the millennial group versus their generational counterparts. Within the data that we look at, we track 12 owned media touchpoints. So that's sales reps, it's brand websites. Across 10 of those 12 touchpoints, we actually see significantly lower levels of trust in the information. And you can see on your screen here, just 19% of millennials actually trust the content on a branded website. So huge implications for our industry. One of the other bits, and we had a lovely presentation earlier about analytics, and what I want to make sure is that I don't over-egg this slide and make it too complicated. What we do is we have 30 touch points. What we're then able to do, if anyone was in the Lego thing, the 6 bits of Lego gives you hundreds of different combinations of how you can build the duck. Similar concept to what this slide is here. We essentially are able to look at all the possible combinations of touch points and then define what the optimal combination of touch points is going to be in a particular audience. So on the right-hand side of the slide here, what you can see is we have defined globally the optimal combination of touch points that would be required to reach the boomer generation of doctors. So what you'll see is a heavy prominence of blue, which is owned media touch points, as well as a little bit of red, which is paid. Now, if we then look and apply the statistical model across those 1,000 healthcare professionals that are millennials, what we see is fundamentally a totally different optimal combination of touch points. So there's actually only one touch point that we have in common across both of these two charts. And then importantly, what you'll see is the prominence of green touch points. These are earned media touch points. So this is conversation with colleagues. It's, it's reputation that you've earned. So massively influential in terms of owned media and the influence that it has in the millennial cohort of doctors. But importantly, it's not just that they're influenced by earned media. We actually also know that there are a generation of doctors that have been brought up to define those influential behaviours and actually do it themselves. So we also know from our data that 74% of millennial healthcare professionals are currently producing medical content for distribution on social media. It gives you a sense of the scale of the opportunity for pharma to actually engage with. And we've just got a couple of quick examples on your screen here that you can see, some non-traditional influences you might not associate with a particular therapy area, huge levels of influence that they can drive.
Yeah, for me, this is fascinating. I mean, we saw a few CX journeys today, and they were all built entirely on paid and owned channels. That means 4 out of 5 millennial healthcare professionals don't believe a word we say. So we really need to radically change the way that we're engaging with them. And as Phil mentioned, we're seeing significantly high levels of them actually go out of their way to post content on their own social channels around their profession, around medicine. And that's actually a trend that we see more broadly as well. So almost 2/3 of millennial healthcare professionals are proactively going out of their way to share their knowledge and share their learnings with their peers, which is significantly higher than that of other generations. But interestingly, that's juxtaposed, and bearing in mind the first trend that we went through, with significantly lower levels of feeling rewarded and recognised for the efforts that they're going to. So less than a third of millennial healthcare professionals actually feel rewarded and recognised for that training and for that learning. And so for us, this really exemplifies the fact that it's more important for us than ever as an industry to take the time to say thank you to our millennial healthcare professionals for the roles that they play. And again, just wanted to share a quick example of a piece that we did at the back end of last year. This campaign was called Shining Thanks on the darkest day. And what we knew going into this is that the week leading up to Christmas generally sees some of the lowest levels of well-being in millennial healthcare professionals. You've got darker days, which has got an impact on mental health. You've got generally higher volumes of patients, and you're also taking physicians away from their families. So it's a really, really difficult time of the year. And all we did was work with the public to collect thousands of really heartfelt thank yous. Thank you to the nurse who held the hand of my dying father because I couldn't get there in time. Thank you to the midwife who supported me through the hardest part of my life. Thank you to the neurologist who saved my life time and time again. And we projection mapped them onto the side of hospitals in the UK. So as doctors, as nurses, as healthcare professionals came out of 12, 13-hour shifts, the first thing they saw was a heartfelt thank you. And we had physicians coming up to us in tears, thanking us for doing this initiative. And I think what's even more interesting is that we did this in collaboration with a charity called Doctors in Distress, who specialise in creating support materials for healthcare professionals. So as well as projection mapping that thank you note, we also projection mapped the note that if you're struggling, go to doctorsindistress.co.uk for some support. And they saw a 300% increase in the download of their support materials that week. So really, really good example of just how far and how important a thank you can go with millennial healthcare professionals. And then the final trend, as Phil said, obviously AI, got to talk about AI. The two most obvious things that we're going to say today, the first is that generally healthcare professionals have very high levels of anticipation and adoption for artificial intelligence. And the second is that that is most notable for millennial healthcare professionals. So we see significantly higher levels of acceptance when it comes to enhancing therapies, replacing therapies, and making them more accessible when it comes to millennial healthcare professionals compared to their generational counterparts. And they generally talk about AI as part of the superhuman superpower stack. So millennial healthcare professionals believe that they bring the heart, they bring the brain, but they want generative AI to be able to enhance and supplement and augment the work that they're doing, and in particular in certain areas.
But I think it's even more interesting when we actually start looking at the differences between the generations in terms of the use cases that they are envisaging AI is going to support with in the future. I think generally across the board we see application of AI as driving across the pharma and the patient treatment journey. But the two specific cases that they're most interested in AI is firstly coming back to that insight around complex thinking, cognitive burnout. AI is going to be a solution for them to reduce and diminish the cognitive load that they have to process and tolerate. So we see 36% of millennials actually thinking that that's the primary use case that they're thinking. But I think even more interestingly, and again, this in some way mirrors some of the insights we see in the consumer landscape, despite being burnt out, despite having significant volumes of patients, they're actually also seeing AI as a significant tool when it comes to diagnostics and ensuring that patients that don't currently have access to treatment that could benefit from treatment actually receive equitable care and delivery of that. So again, really interesting kind of altruistic perspective about how AI is going to support society. The final thing then is we know AI is going to be really critical, not just for healthcare professionals, but again for us, and we've sat and listened today to lots of talks about AI. We're now at a point where what we're going to be able to do is start harnessing huge volumes of data that we have access to then start to actually bring that to life through generative AI. So we've got a really quick case study that we're probably not going to kind of have time to go through the whole thing, but just wanted to give you a case of now the art of the possible. And what we're starting to do is take the millennial data that we have within our 0.1 data system. we're now feeding that into artificial intelligence and generative AI so that we can actually bring customers to life. That's not just for the sake of tech, for technology's sake. It's there to support internal teams, interrogate communication strategies, interrogate, your thinking and what you're putting out there. So just wanted to give a quick flavour of a very lo-fi version that was put together at great speed for this presentation, but hopefully gives you a sense of the art of the possible.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Alex Vasquez, a pediatric hospital specialist based in a busy city hospital in the US. I have an MD and MPH. I care for some of the most vulnerable patients, children, and their families. What are my preferred communication channels? My preferred communication channels revolve around print and online medical journals, guidelines, and conversations with colleagues. Additionally, I find scientific meetings, podcasts, and webinars valuable for deeper dives into treatment options.
So yeah, really lovely example of how we can use generative AI to take big sets of data and make it a lot more engaging and almost create synthetic market research.
So final slide from us before we open out for a few questions and thoughts. Hopefully you found it, to some extent stimulating in terms of the data that we presented. There's lots of it. But for us, 3 key take-home messages in terms of short-term and long-term. So when we start thinking about, the emotional, the cognitive burnout of the millennial healthcare professional, now is really the time to start analysing the communications that you're putting out there towards these healthcare professionals to make sure that we're doing it in an empathetic fashion. In the future, we can start to actually think about the emotions that they're experiencing. See the previous case study, it's like, how can you start to put out a tone of voice through a particular message or a particular channel? How can you ensure that you do that so that it's at the right time and it's going to, land in the right emotion to a doctor? When we think about trust, I think the most important take-home message from us is really think about earned media and moving away from the traditional model of, owned and paid media. There's a rich opportunity out there for brands to begin to leverage earned media within their marketing mix. And then again, longer term, begin to build that kind of footprint in earned media through your partnerships. And then the final piece, AI, obviously, most of you in the room today will have pilot projects that you're working on. Again, continue to explore those opportunities, but longer term, start to think how you can stitch together the big data sets as well as leverage generative AI to actually bring customers to life. And that's everything that we had for you guys today. Really appreciate you listening. I'd just love to open for any thoughts, comments, questions from the group.
No, thank you.